OK, now it is that time in the morning when we take a look at some of the top stories making the front pages of today's international newspapers. And joining me in the studio for a stroll through the headlines is the greatest journalist and media commentator in the world.
No,
Thamsanqa Zhou.
Not like that. Well, you are.
It's a Kanye West effect, you know. I'm complimenting everybody. I can't help myself. OK, I shall now rein back from irreverence and deal with some more serious issues. Now, the first of the newspaper titles we're going to be following up is the Nigerian paper This Day. It's quite a packed front page, but even though the stories appear to be different, they're all interconnected.
They're all interconnected. The headline is actually Senator Saraki, who says there was no deal with the opposition. He is from the ruling party, the APC in Nigeria. He was not forwarded as a favored candidate to be Senate president. But somehow, when they got to the voting in the Senate, there were a lot of PDP, or the opposition party,
this is Jonathan's party.
President, Jonathan's party, who voted for him, which meant that he then became the Senate president ahead of Lawan, who was the candidate that had been forwarded by his own party.
There's something strategic going on there.
Yes. And then the same thing happened in the House of Representatives, because we know that Ogara was the person who ended up there ahead of the candidate that the APC wanted. So now there are bigger stories. The first one is about the leader of the House, the deputy leader of the House, the whip, or the chief whip of the party in the House. And this party, the APC, are saying they want to forward these candidates. But now there's a question whether what happened when the elections for Senate President and the Speaker of the House, whether that will happen again. And then they go on further and say President Buhari is still waiting for the list of people that will be ministers that need to be approved by the House.
Sure.
And the party is saying that they want to present their list of favored candidates because these people are seconded by or deployed by the party. And there's a question whether the House will allow that to happen, seeing as there's a lot that's going on within the party and the different parties within it.
And the timing couldn't be worse for Muhammadu Buhari, because if we actually go inside the pages of This Day, there's a story about his trip to the United States. This was flagged up a few days ago, in fact, and there's a paragraph buried in here which basically says that questions are being raised as to who's going to represent Nigeria in high-level meetings with US officials if Buhari's ministers are not in place by the time of this visit. And this is a very important visit for Mr. Buhari. It's not just symbolic, but it's also a reaffirmation of ties between the two countries, which at one point had looked a little bit strange because America wasn't prepared to give weapons to Nigeria in the fight against Boko Haram.
Well, it might be one that most people in Nigeria seem to say it might not be a crisis at all, because President Buhari has come in as wanting to stretch that hand of being inclusive and work with even the ministers that were working for former President Jonathan. Because if you look at the timetable of the House, where the approval or the accreditation process has to happen, it is highly unlikely that those ministers will be in place before the actual visit. Because the visit is planned, everything is in place, but the House has been adjourned, and they will need all that time. They can't fast-track the whole thing. So there is a likelihood that he might still go with the ministers that are there now who were appointed by former President Jonathan. But most people who know how he works seem to think that it is the interest of Nigeria, and he will work across parties and wants to be inclusive.
Which really underscores the difficulties that he has in terms of upholding those electoral promises and at the same time keeping all sides on board for the big journey ahead. Let's move on now to another of the newspapers, and this time we're going to the online version of the Sunday Telegraph. This is a British newspaper, and they've picked up on Friday's terrorist assault on a Tunisian beach carried out by a lone gunman. The majority of people killed appear to have been British, mixed nationalities, but we know so far that 15 British tourists are amongst the dead. And the question that they're posing is about the gunman himself, because, as the headline says, he was a family man with a mixed passion for Real Madrid and a devotion as well for ISIL. And, of course, it's that recurring question that always comes up whenever dreadful things like this happen. Somebody who seems perfectly normal shows no affiliation openly with a terrorist organisation, then goes on to commit an atrocity.
Right. There are quite a number of things that come up both in the article and other newspapers that are covering the same thing, and a bigger argument that continues to go on. This is a terrible atrocity that was done in Tunisia. The Tunisian government, the Tunisian people are very unhappy about what has happened. But there is also frustration from a lot of people within the Muslim world who say that when someone goes out to commit such an atrocity, either on their own or with very few people, the name Islam comes up. And that frustration also came yesterday when the officials in Tunisia said, oh no, hold on a minute. This is not something that we want to relate to Islam. It's not about someone, a very nice young engineer who was in university, who was then radicalized. The attempt here is to say when someone does something, it must not be blamed on ideology or religion or anything. And the bigger question that most of the people in Tunisia and other areas have been trying to emphasize is ISIL and Al-Qaeda and others are trying to claim religion or Islam as part of their footstool to commit whatever they're doing.
It's a very extreme interpretation of a very peaceful religion.
Yeah, and they are saying that the majority of the victims are actually Muslims.
Exactly.
So what these people do has nothing to do with Islam. But then again, we continue to see the West interpreting all these things in the context of, oh, it's Islam.
Yeah, but it's also the Western presentation of the story as well, the coverage, because certainly in the British press we have focused on the fact that many of these victims were British. And it has to be stressed as well, as you pointed out, in fact, that this was a beach which wasn't reserved for foreigners. It was used by visitors to the country and locals, Tunisians themselves. They were caught up in this.
Yeah, but this incident, the problem with this incident, it would appear, even the pictures or the footage that came out from the incident itself, that local people and those that were not of Western origin appeared to have been not on his target list, because he went through the beach, leaving others and actually choosing victims. There were hundreds of people at that point, and as we know, so many lost their lives.
So some of those local people were also involved in trying to help those who were wounded and injured, and that was the point, because many of the survivors have actually heaped tremendous praise on the Tunisians and how they rose to the event and tried to do their best to save lives. Yeah,
even the medical services, there are so many lives that could have been lost, that were saved, and it's really, really unfortunate that those died. But the bigger picture and the bigger question is always that all these countries that have got Muslims have continued to say the religion should not be related to the crimes that
Tam, I'm going to have to step in here because time runs against us, but we will be rejoining you a little bit later on in the programme, because again, this story does of course influence quite a bit of the coverage from various perspectives. But Thamsanqa Zhou, for now, thank you.